This week on FX Guide TV.
We talked to Flame artist and owner Sam Edwards, who spent 8 months working production side on the new Cosmos television series.
Hello and welcome to FX Guide TV. Before the show starts this week, as regular viewers know, from time to time, I like to acknowledge just how far we've come, with your help, especially with the Insider program. This month, FX Guide passes 1.7 million annual visitors. That's not page views or clicks, that's uniques. Here at FX Guide TV, we get in a week what the whole of FX Guide used to get in 6 months when we started. And this is really all thanks to our Insider members. Without you, we'd have to plaster the whole site with ads. And who wants that? You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, well now it's over to Mike for this week's show.
Thanks, Angie. Cosmos, a Spacetime Odyssey, is a new 13-part series. On the ship of the imagination, Neil deGrasse Tyson takes viewers on a journey across the universe and across time. Meanwhile, here on planet Earth, Sam Edwards is a flame artist and a really good friend of FX Guide, in fact, since we first started the site. He owns his own flame system and works on a variety of high-end type jobs. For Cosmos Season 1, he composited 250 shots, which is about a sixth of the total show, and did additional work on at least 60 more. In fact, in total, he spent 8.5 months working in the production offices of the show Cosmos, but not as a VFX vendor. John visited those production offices to speak with him and ask him, basically, what is the advantage of working as in-house VFX?
I think that all VFX really should be done in-house. That I think that, first disadvantage of the way we do VFX today, there's sort of the telephone game effect where you have a director or a showrunner who's giving instructions to a VFX supervisor, who are dictating those instructions to a coordinator, who are then giving them probably to a coordinator at a vendor, who then reads them back to a VFX supervisor at a vendor, and then finally talks to an artist sitting in a chair who's going to make the shot. And, you know, any 7-year-old knows that when you pass any message verbally that many times, it's going to get changed. And so I have the unique advantage of being able to stop the showrunner in the hallway and say, did you mean more blue? And very often, and even show her, say, well, this is what you saw in the screening room, and I have a color correct monitor, so I can say, this is what you saw. Does this address it? And she's, very easy, approachable person. And frankly, if you multiplied that by 10, if you had 10 of us here, you could probably, I don't think it would be a huge imposition on her time and the efficiency of it. I think that many clients and filmmakers don't realize that all these inefficiencies that are created by the current system do come out of their pocket some way or another, and certainly come out of their time and energy that they have to screen sometimes many, many versions before something finally, through this inefficient process, is what they were looking for.
So do you actually think you ended up doing fewer versions on the shots that you did?
I think some of that's me. Some of that is that, as a rule, I never show somebody something that I don't think they can use in their show. First take should be finalable. It should be, to the best of my understanding, everything that they want in the shot. And I don't believe in showing tests. I don't believe in showing rough. I don't show things with caveats, because those people don't have time for any of that. And you have to be really respectful of somebody who, these people have 1,500 VFX shots to do in less than a year. And very often you're asking them to tell you something that they can't. That if you say, well, don't pay attention to all that stuff on the left, do you like the sun over on the right? Well, that's not fair. They need to look at the whole shot, and it either works or it doesn't. And ask them to look at parts of it, that's not the training they have, that's not the... So why waste anybody's time? You're going to have to do all that work eventually anyway. Why not wait and show it to them when it's ready?
So in the end, I guess it provides both creative and financial benefits for the production.
I believe all VFX facilities need to put a certain padding in every bid for the what if. And, you know, I'm here and they're renting my flame by the week and they're paying me by the hour. I mean, I don't even bid. They just say, here's a shot, you know, go do it. And, you know, oh, you need something to do? Well, here's another shot, go do it. And they get to decide also whether something, you know, they're looking at a first take and it took 4 hours. And they can say, wow, that looks pretty good already. You know, maybe we should just use that. Or, you know, you need to know 2 more things to finish this shot. And they'll tell me those 2 other things. And then very often I can finish it on take 2 or 3. I mean, I don't think I didn't get past take 10 on anything on this whole show.
Since you come with a flame system, there's a significant benefit that you come as a package deal, is there?
Right. But realize that advantage for me is almost a disadvantage. And when I bought a flame, and this whole idea that, oh, I'm always going to have a perfect flame, I'm only going to have as good a flame as I put the time and energy into. And I didn't realize that I was going to have this whole second job, that when I'm done compositing for the day very often, you know, oh, well, my graphics card's acting flaky, and does it need new firmware, or, you know. And every single day going and looking at the RAID array and making sure there's no red lights is just something that I hadn't really thought about. And now living this way every day, I realize that it takes a certain amount of extra effort, that it isn't just the fact that you're responsible is extra effort, even if nothing goes wrong.
But they don't know that.
They don't, well, and I try to make that not apparent to them in any way.
Right.
Yeah, I try to make that completely transparent.
Are there specific things about flame that allow you to be able to pull this off yourself?
I feel that like action is almost like a CG environment now. You have a trackable camera, or an animatable camera, or you can track it to a plate, but then you can bring in 3D geometry. You can project that really, you know, the way that I'm using action with multiple outputs, so that really I use action as my animation CG environment, and then that spills into my batch where I kind of use logic ops and do all the color and filtering afterwards. So yeah, I feel like, yes, I can do more than I could do in another package. And the features are finished. That I think that some of the more recent packages have a lot of Me Too features that aren't as polished. And also just the feedback, that Flame was written to give you real-time feedback. And other packages assume that the images live across a network, that you're only going to be seeing them at, you know, 15 megabytes a second. Well, you know, I have a 1600 megabyte per second disk array, and so the feedback loop is blazingly fast. But the software was written from the start to take advantage of that, to give you that real-time feedback.
Do you think the setup that you have doing things in-house is kind of the future of post?
I would hope so. I really feel that that we as digital artists have so much to offer productions, and having us an ocean away and somebody that they only, you know, deal with really text message sized interactions is just really just, I mean, we can only give someone as much as they ask us for. And I don't think that it's even a question of money, that I would think the money would be similar, if not less, to get, you know, thinking, breathing human beings in the same room, having a synergy of ideas. You know, yes, the possibilities are endless, but it seems like now we start by boxing things in. We start by defining what it is and defining how we're going to do it inexpensively. And I feel like there's a whole nother way to make a show. I mean, you think that if any of us visual effects artists were to make a show, we sure wouldn't be making it over the telephone.
Well, so it sounds in a way you're against remote collaboration. But on one end, it seems great to have all these people around the world with specific talents and abilities contributing to a job. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
There's an openness of communication in some of these newer models that I think that the facilities don't have. That there's, and you know, these large facilities, I think, are somewhat afraid of the artists. That the director is not going to call the big facility next time, they're going to call the artists that delivered. And I don't think that's true if the facility is truly providing a service and truly a conduit of information. But the way it works often now, there's just so many people, so many layers of filtering that the artist maybe hasn't even heard the sound for the shot they're working on, doesn't even know what the guy is talking about. And when I compare that to working here on Cosmos, I can go in the editing room and say, can I see this part? Can I see the part that, and the editors are totally open to it. They love it. And they'll even chime in and say, well, I always thought it could be this, or I thought it could be that. And you know, nobody's stepping on anybody's toes. We're just working together. We're just making the best show we can. And I would love it if more of our industry worked that way. It's been great for me.
Well, enough talking. Why don't we go ahead and dive in and take a look at some of the work you did on Cosmos?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, the first shot that I wanted to show you was where they were talking about different cultures having different symbols and seeing different things in the stars. And so here's 4 different things that people all saw around our Orion, different cultures. So we started off with the images from different cultures. They were just freehand G masks that I made, that I drew. And I used a color corrector to do kind of a trace edges. And really that's just the curves. Since there's softness on the G mask, black maps down to black, of course. But the mid-gray goes to, you know, exactly the 0.5 value goes up to 1, and the white goes back down to black. So, so we're just using a color corrector. And the handy thing about using a color corrector to do your edges is the smoothness is tons better than using any kind of trace edges or any of those kinds of filters. It's just perfectly smooth. And I'm going to turn off filtering so you can actually see the real pixels. Wish that was a default. And you can see that it's as smooth as it can possibly be. So remembering that this color corrector on a soft mat, and you'll see that I use that a lot in my setups. The next step then was to reveal this, since each of those, if you remember in our clip, each of these images draws onto the screen. We used I just used a G mask to reveal it frame by frame, and the hand was laid in there. So look at all these keyframes I have. And you can see the G mask popping around, and I can even set a context up here. I'm going to multiply that G mask on, and here you can see as that G mask moves, it's gonna, and you know, people look at this and go, oh my God, how tedious, but it's the kind of thing you can really, when you sit down and roll up your sleeves, you can do it in just a couple of minutes. So there it goes. These are all my G mask keyframes, and that's the G mask revealing that hand shape. And then Sapphire Matte-Ops is used for each of these symbols, and it's animated also. So here what you see is once the thing is drawn on, it draws on. And the Matte-Ops, the interesting thing here is setting the octaves very, very, very high. Matte-Ops is going to just add a certain level of noise to the thing, but the octaves give it that really soft, kind of smoky quality. And I basically, whenever I use any of these sapphires that use octaves, kind of immediately go in type 5. But then there's also an animation on it so that once, instead of fading each of these characters off, once they're done drawing, there's just an animation on the Mad Ops where I'm playing with the noise width and the grow shrink to make them kind of particle away. And it's sort of a poor man's particles, because we could have drawn these with a particle generator, but I kind of feel like this, and if I scrub through, you'll see what it looks like in real time. They kind of, you know, dissolve away in particles. And I always thought that was kind of a cool way to take something like that off screen. So that's one of our symbols through time. And then the action here, and this is something I do a lot of as well, I set up an action with a lot of outputs. So there might be one, so here you can see, well, the first one's called Constellation, but in fact, what we're using it for is the figures here. Very often my top one will just be everything together, but what we're going to output from here, and there's a common camera move, there's just a single camera for all these outputs. So this camera has a few keyframes on it, and what we're going to output from here is these constellations, or these drawings that are already revealing in the right timing, are stars. We have something that I've called Twinkle, and I use this over and over on Cosmos, where I would take a substance noise, and I thought it was fun to use the one called Milky Way. And by animating its disorder property, it makes it just kind of move around. And basically, I'll show you what we do with that in a second. But basically, I use that to make the stars twinkle. I think we're using 3 different outputs here. The first one's the figures, and they get blurred, pretty simple. Color corrected blue, and then added back on top. And that gives it that nice blue glow. And that's a look that we established for the whole show. In this case, they weren't quite legible enough, and I gave them an even bigger glow. And the stars come out of the action. And you can think of this way of working as being like CG rendering and CG compositing, all in one setup. So we render out our camera move applied to our noise pattern, and I color correct it so it gets much brighter. I want values that float way above 1. So when we multiply that onto the stars, some of the stars get darker and some get lighter. And that'll, you know, as that pattern moves, you're going to see them twinkle like stars. And then we add our constellations back on. 50% transparent. I guess I probably got a note that it was too bright. They're already meticulously lined up with the stars. Remember that this is a science show. And you know, when we talk about a constellation like this and a drawing that's on top, it can't just kind of line up. It has to line up precisely with how it was drawn with those stars. And so I got to sit with our science advisor and deal with that. Now our show is all in logarithmic color space, and we have these different looks for different scenes. All of our pure CG scenes, of course, we had a standard look that we turn on to check it. And I'm using mostly standard log deletions to keep them, to get them in that log space and then check them in our color space. And I've been doing most of the graining on this show also in log color space, because you want them to get both lighter and darker in the blacks. And I think that the flames grain setup really does look better in log, and we output it. So that was a pretty fun shot, and I'll show it to you one more time. The only note I got on my first take of this shot was, can you make it longer? Which I always think is a really great sign. The executive producer saw this, and it told the exact story they wanted to tell, and it was a whole lot of fun. The next thing I'd like to show you is Halley's Comet, and we'll loop it a little bit while I talk. And this isn't necessarily photoreal. It's, it's supposed to be a pretty shot of the comet. And, but you can see a lot of things going on here. We've got a particle system running. And we've got our star field that's twinkling. And let me just show you real quick how we put this together. And this is how I work an awful lot of the time. We're basically feeding tons of stuff into one action. We're feeding basically everything we need into an action. And you'll see this is how I comp. We're putting together all the elements that feed into an action. We're getting them animated. And then basically we're doing a CG style comp afterwards. So the first thing that we feed in is some substance noise, and that's animated substance noise. We're using the disorder quality. So it's animated. This is a full 2K substance noise. And you can see how you basically have swirling dark and light areas. So that was the first element that I made. The second was that we got a matte painting. And this is from Michael, a very talented matte painter on the show. And he painted me a single frame here. It was slightly unfortunate that it ran out of frame there on the side. But I figured I could crop it and that we could work with it. And then we have 6 sides of a cube that are all the stars that you can see in our galaxy. And we have several versions of them, one with the galaxy markings on them, so I can find my way, because in this show, unlike many things you might work on, in this show, it's really important to have the correct stars. So this red line is going to be my outline, my border of what we're actually going to be rendering. But you can see it's a whole 3D space. And I can roll this cube. You'll love this. We can roll this cube any way and get any stars in the whole galaxy. I'm going to undo that. So that's how we can always find the right stars. And we know that this dipper is something that Halley's Comet almost always goes past the dipper. And so that was my point of reference. And we got it all lined up so it's in a reasonable spot. One of the things we did with the matte painting before it comes in is we used a sapphire warps on it. And that will load in a second. And again, here's something where wherever there's an octaves control, I always turn it way up. What I wanted to do was get like kind of a dusty pattern going through it, because comet tail isn't solid. It's a bunch of space dust coming out of something. Octaves are turned way up. If you don't, it just looks a little simpler and kind of blurry. But the octaves gives it this really nice textury look. And of course you have 2 parameters, and I've got the octaves all the way up on both of them. And the 2 parameters gives you 2 levels of noise and warping going through there. So you can have one going a little faster, one going a little slower, and it really makes it look like it's kind of a smoky emission from this bright end of the comet. So all those things feed into an action setup. We're in. But to get this last layer of interesting particles, I don't think this will play back in real time anymore. I'm just feeding in too much. But you see these moving white particles going through. That was actually a particle generator parented right below the image of the Milky Way, or of Halley's Comet. And I think the only animation on them is, it's gravity, so they fall. So that they weren't always just going in a straight line. They kind of have a curve to them the way the Halley's Comet does. So look at all these outputs we have from this action. All was really just for my own viewing of what I'm putting together here. And of course, you couldn't use it because it's got all these lines in it to show. Here, I can brighten it up for you. So you can see where the constellations are and get it all lined up. But then look at these other outputs. We have the comet coming out, and it's still, it retained that kind of smoky quality from the filter. the particles come out separately, and you can see that they actually pick up the color of the comet. I made a displacement texture because I wanted possibly to give an extra like bump to the way that the comet tail behaves. We have our twinkle pass, which is that noise pattern, and that's just applied to the two sides of the cube that we're actually using, so that'll give us an undulating light and dark areas that we can make the stars twinkle. And we have the stars, which are really just the inner points of the stars. And you can see that it really has every star in the galaxy is visible. And then the glow, which really just calls attention to the bigger stars, which is really useful. And so let's see how we comp that together. So we're done animating. Basically, all that animation was just done with the camera. And you can see here over the course of it, the FOV is the main thing that changes. But that keeps all those things moving in perfect registration. So first thing, there was a comet. And that's it all, kind of rendered, through the camera move. And it got, of course, a lens flare, because everything's better with a lens flare on it. But I put a little blur on that flare. In this case, added it on somewhat transparent. So the flare just gives that last little bit of zing to it. The twinkle comes out and gets blurred and histoed different ways to brighten it. And that gets multiplied onto the stars, making a few of them, so that's our twinkle pattern now blurred and histoed. You see some of these things are very, very bright. So those stars in that area, as that pattern undulates, those stars get very, very bright. And as it moves, different stars twinkle in different timing. And so we had that displacement pattern that I showed you earlier that was coming out. So here we're going to use that, and I think you see it particularly at the end of the shot. Here's a sapphire distort. So our comet, our displacement pattern, and then let's see if we can see the difference. Yeah, you can see how that makes the tail of the comet, kind of be more wavy. And that pattern is going through it. So there's those little particles are added in, and the stars, and flip it to log color space. And at this point, start checking it through our standard look for the show. That was a look that the DP created. Bill Pope created that on set to go with the footage. Of course, love to do my grain in log color space. And a lot of people are like, hey, this is full CG. Why would you need to put grain on it? But something like this with very subtle gradients in it, if it doesn't have a noise pattern, will tend to go very, it'll get false contours around these shapes if there isn't some kind of noise to break it up. So that's a really essential step. Must grain these things with these very subtle gradients, especially in the blue channel, are going to go very contoured on an 8-bit diffusion, at the final release. And on your 8-bit plasma display, it's gonna band up like crazy if you don't put a little noise on there. So that was a fun shot. It's I think at the end of episode 3, and very successful. But it did take a few takes. I think that was take 5 or so. So this is kind of an exciting part of Cosmos, where Neil flies the ship of the imagination right up to the sun. And this is a shot I would call it like kind of disco-y, that there's really like, lots of glints and glows. But, my feeling was you couldn't get this close to the sun without, the camera misbehaving in several ways. And they liked the look of it, so, it was kind of fun. So let me show you what we did. A few things I want to point out is that the sun's reflected on the floor, but there's a shadow of a reflection of his chair in front of it. There's probably several layers of heat ripple going on, lots of glints and glows from all the brightest stuff in the background, and that there's some kind of key bright spots on the ground. So, but yeah, the big heat ripple and lots of glints and glows. So this setup, as you might guess, is not small, but not crazy big. For what it is, I think we started with a shot of Neil in the on the SOTI set, and it's clearly camera tracked, or clearly a dolly. And the other thing that we started with was this 4K, phases of the sun from NASA. This was, I'm sure, captured by them to show a very large solar event over there, but wasn't what we needed for this shot. So the solar event is cropped off in our shot of the sun. But even though it's 4K, when you get this close to the Earth, it does, kind of start to fall apart when you get that close into the sun. So, so that goes through. The sun initially gets like a kind of a color correct treatment but also these kind of filtered areas that add a little bit extra detail into the washed out. We're dealing with 8-bit shots from NASA, but I also needed to add a couple little bright spots to correspond with the bright areas that are on the that are reflected in the plate. And that was just a few random G masks, blurred out, good old sapphire matte ops, of course. And yeah, those just got a quick color correct and screened over and gave us some extra little bright areas in the sun. And pretty quick business to get this thing tracked in to match. We punch it on the sun to the framing we need. Get our basic key of Neil on the ship of the imagination. Look how bright, by the way, this thing was shot. I mean, they were thinking, oh, he's going into the sun, but I was kind of thinking more reflections and stuff. So let's follow Neil's plate now to where we're going. So first thing I did was try to get it down in a more where I would probably really expose it if I was inside a spaceship and flying that close to the sun. So, and that's when I started noticing that there are a few very bright hot spots, and that's, we needed to, here's a second color corrector that's not quite so bright, and I used one for the top part to keep it bright and still use the bottom color corrected down to where I wanted it. The next step was all of these set lights were really not helping my edges. And rather than correspond to all of them, I just flat replaced that whole front lip of the ship of the imagination. And that's just a simple G mask. And of course, where my mat's going to cut it on the bottom, it could just be soft. Well, then the next thing I did was I started working on my wrap. And I just want to show you really quickly how I build that. I take my background and my matte, and I don't know why it's not rendering correctly at this resolution, this minute, but I multiply those two together. And, or it's actually a negative of the matte. And that gives me my background with all this stuff punched out, with everything that's going to be my foreground punched out of it. And then when you blur that and screen it, probably add it over your foreground, it just gives you sun peeking in all the way. You can see right here on Neil's pit. It just gives you little bits of sun peeking over his edges. And it's, where the brighter things are, they kind of bloom up and get brighter where they go into the edges. I also took that same or a similar multiplied version of the foreground. So I flipped and flopped a rough version of my matte, multiplied onto the background, and gave that a quick color correct and blur. And that became our ground reflection of the sun on the ship of the imagination floor. So this isn't comped yet. This is still my front, all just getting prepared to be overed onto to the plate. There seems to be a secondary amount of reflection on the floor, and then that's finally where we then blend all this over our sun. And now our sun's gotten quite dark here, but with all the glows and stuff, I had to kind of pre-color correct it down. So here's where the fun begins. The first warp you can see is kind of a heat ripple warp, and this is warp bubble 2. And there's definitely 2 frequencies going through, and they take Neil and they just give it that kind of wobbly heat ripple look. Here's untreated and treated. Kind of just distorts it as if you're looking through something, you're actually that close to the sun. And then never stop glowing things when you're this close to the sun would be my advice. Just glow the crap out of it. And the glints, and now these look totally disco-y when you see them applied like this. But with all the other, nonsense going on in a shot like this, it sort of does give it a nice, it just makes you feel like you're in something that's really bright and brightly lit. And those, I guess those were even too bright for me, and I blended them out a little bit. And then we have, this is nice. This is a lens flare that I shot in my garage. And this is just a little bit of light going out of frame. And the edge reflections that you get with a red camera, I think in another color space you might see these better. But so that's, just those little, and the light is already exited frame, and that's all the craziness that you get with a red scarlet camera, just panning it past the light bulb. And so that was kind of I think that's only at the beginning of the shot. Here we go. So those are those funny rays, and a shot like this, you're getting so close that things don't have to be real. They can be a little random like that. And so, we can imagine that there's something super bright right outside a frame coming from the sun. So that's in there. And then here is a lens flare, another one. Presumably we have a bright source somewhere way out here. That's the Cook lens that has that's in Sapphire 7 that I really like. And then this multiply is just taking a blurred G mask, big blurred G mask, and giving the overall shot just a little bit of a vignette, a little darkening in the corners. And we use that same G mask shape to drive a Z blur to throw the corners just a little bit out of focus. Seems to be a final. And then here's our chroma aberration applied, quite a bit, but one would imagine that the lens is going to misbehave. And then we flip the whole shot back to log color space, so we need our look applied, and apply the grain in log, because it looks better that way. So that's that shot flying close to the sun in the ship of the imagination. Those are only a few of the shots that I worked on. There was actually 38,357 frames that I touched of the first 6 episodes. And it was just a great experience working with Reiner Gumbos and the great VFX producers here. I feel like, I was able to make really a major contribution to the series. And, those are just some of the highlights.
Thanks, John. And special thanks to Sam and the team. I've got to say, episodic television is very close to my heart, especially when it has to do with science. It's really, really great work, and I love the show. So thanks so much. Back to you, Angie.
Thanks, Mike. Oh, and if you are not an Insider member, that's cool. We know it can be really, really hard sometimes. But if you did want to contribute, just Google FX Guide Insider or go to fxguide.com/insider. Thanks again so much from all of us here at FX Guide. And until next time, see ya.
For more industry news, in-depth features, podcasts and forums, check out fxguide.com. And for visual effects training, check out fxphd.com.